Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the Space Industry Indemnities Bill now be read a third time. I start with a short summary of the bill. The bill will amend two sections of the Space Industry Act 2018 to provide legal certainty that all spaceflight operator licences must include a limit on the amount of the operator's liability to the government under Section 36 of the Space Industry Act 2018. And the reason for this is under international law applicable to space, governments, including the UK, are liable for damage to property or death or personal injury caused by space activities. Section 36 passes on that liability to spaceflight operators and requires them to indemnify the government. But without that legal certainty over a cap, much needed investment in the UK space industry, critical for defence, critical for civilian purposes, will be held back, and that investment will go elsewhere. That is the purpose of this bill, to encourage vital investment in our space sector, a sector of which we should be proud. Now, I realise that it has not always been the case that parliamentarians in this place have been enthusiastic for space. When Luna 2, the Soviet spacecraft, reached the surface of the Moon on the 13th of September 1959, the Foreign Secretary, Selwyn Lloyd, who went on to be a Speaker of this place, reacted with great enthusiasm. He said, "I don't think many people are terribly interested in the Russian rocket," despite it being historic. Harold Macmillan, on the other hand, was much more enthusiastic, and when Armstrong and Aldrin were waiting in the lunar module and we'd had the man on the moon, Harold Wilson said, "We must all be filled with a profound sense of wonder and admiration in witnessing this historic event." And in fact, the UK did play some important roles in that space mission, and UK industry was involved in that space mission. There was somewhat of a stushy, that's a Scots word for row, about the failure of the British ambassador to attend the launch. And his letter on the National Archives explains why. And the explanation basically boils down to the fact that he'd been to one previously, and once you've seen one space launch, you've seen them all. So it just goes to show that the importance of the special relationship is nothing new, and it did cause somewhat of a stushy. Nothing, of course, in 1969 was as important as Newcastle United winning the Intercity Fairs Cup. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the space sector and satellites are central to almost everyone's day-to-day lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, if you're paying for something with your phone... Yes, I'd be delighted to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he was just talking about the importance of the space sector to so many of us and indeed to the whole of the UK, and I wonder if he joins with me in welcoming the investment of this Labour UK government in the space sector in Scotland.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. And yes, the UK government has invested in Orbex in the north of Scotland in Forres, and that's a very, very important investment, because it still remains the case that it's important that we give grants to earlier stage companies because they can't get the equity and debt funding that more advanced companies do. So I welcome that investment. It's very, very important. And Madam Deputy Speaker, as you tap in and out of the underground, perhaps on the way home or when purchasing things, that requires on satellite technology. Space is a key focus for the National Wealth Fund, Madam Deputy Speaker, something that was confirmed by Lord Livermore, the Financial Secretary of Treasury, and John King, the Chief Executive of the National Wealth Fund, as we discussed the National Wealth Fund at the Treasury Select Committee this week. So it's an important future business for Britain. There's an important economic opportunity here. There's another reason why it's very, very important to invest in space, and that is for defence. It's absolutely critical to the defence of the United Kingdom. And it helps ensure that if we have a vibrant space industry in the United Kingdom, that will support the technological innovation we need to defend our country and our allies as we move on into a much more difficult foreign policy context.
I mean, I'm sure the honourable member will be aware of the role that the Starlink system has played in Ukraine for enabling the frontline operations of the Ukrainian army. And of course, for a very, very long period of time, GPS was the main determination as to whether or not Trident could arrive at its destination. It strikes me, and would the honourable member agree, that actually in some ways the technology of our ability to put things into space and what we are putting up there is going to be the absolute thing which determines the nature of warfare in the 21st century.
My honourable friend makes a very, very important point. It's a critical point, but as we develop defence, and the UK government is committed to investing in defence and investing in advances in defence, that investing in space is utterly critical and central to this. And it's a matter of some regret, may I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Scottish companies investing in military matters are not funded by the Scottish National Investment Bank or Scottish Enterprise, because they have this view that we shouldn't be investing in defence, even though, of course, it will create jobs and is important for defending the north of Scotland, where my mother came from, which is now very, very important for defence. Now, I'm an MP for Glasgow, and Glasgow has a rich history of innovation and an incredibly promising cluster of space expertise. And my seat has a fantastic university, the University of Strathclyde. And I recently met with Professor Malcolm MacDonald from Strathclyde University, who's director of the Centre for Signal and Image Processing and also director of the Applied Space Technology Laboratory. And he outlined to me with great enthusiasm and great knowledge the amount of innovation in the space sector in Glasgow and across the United Kingdom. This is an absolutely critical industry that we must invest in and create the conditions of investment. And across the UK, around 52,000 people work in the space sector. So this is a big opportunity. I will now turn to talk about what the bill precisely does, albeit with 4 words. The bill seeks to limit space operators' liability. Now, I start by emphasising that space flight activities are heavily regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority for Safety. This is something that has day-to-day scrutiny of safety from an expert safety regulator. The CAA is one of the best regulators in the world. And so we're concerned with small risks that are reduced to the very minimum extent possible by a very strong regulatory regime. And one of the reasons, actually, why our family of nations is a great advantage in space is that because we're right at the end of Europe, we actually have a great place to launch because we don't launch over big urban areas. If we go right up to Shetland, there's nothing for hundreds of miles. The next point I make is under international space law, there's treaties, and the UK government has a long-standing legal liability for damage caused by UK space flight-related operations. And so there is, despite the space safety regime, a residual risk that things go wrong, and the UK government faces claims. And the UK government can make claims against operators, and this takes place under Section 36 of the 2018 Act. And this, of course, is quite proper. Operators have to assume risk, operators have to bear risk, and, of course, the government needs to make sure that operators can pay out on claims made against it, which is why the 2018 Act regime, and as we're adopting a cross-party spirit today, quite rightly so, I commend the previous government for its work on space law, makes provisions for compulsory insurance to be put in place by space operators. So the businesses have to ensure themselves they're regulated by a very competent regulator. And so the question here is what happens if a claim exceeds the amount of insurance that on a sensible basis can be put in place. And that's really what we're addressing here. And the current legislation does not require the Civil Aviation Authority or the government to include a cap in the licence. It makes it optional. And Section 12.2 of the 2018 Act provides an operator licence may specify a limit on the amount of the licensee's liability under Section 36 in respect of the activities authorised by the licence. And the critical thing my bill does, Madam Deputy Speaker, is quite simply swap may for must. And an any in Section 36 is changed to the as a consequence. And this is consistent with long-standing government policy that the liability should be limited. There is a clear documented policy that it is limited. However, a problem with documented policies as opposed to statute, and here I go back as a recovering lawyer to my legal career, is that government policies are ultimately much easier to change than statutes. You can have claim for legitimate expectations and a breach of those, but that's a very difficult class of claim to run, and there haven't been a huge number of successful cases of that sort in the courts. It's a difficult area of public law. So business quite properly says, well, you could change this policy and expose our existing investments to additional risk. And businesses could, of course, then go and look elsewhere for investment. So investors will not invest in the same way, facing this and facing the lack of statutory protection. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, the critical thing that this bill does is include a statutory protection. It requires the government to cap the liability and it encourages people to invest. And that puts us on a par with our principal competitor nations for space investment. So 4 words in this bill, 2 words swapped, but absolutely critical for the future of an industry that could be brilliant for the United Kingdom and all of our constituents for years to come.
Melanie Ward.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I just wondered if he would agree with me that the sense of possibility and innovation that the space sector gives to our country and indeed to the world is one of the important things about it. And he's talking about 4 words, and I wonder if there's another 4 words that we could take inspiration from. They're the words of Buzz Lightyear when he says, "to infinity and beyond."
Madam Deputy Speaker, one thing I would say is my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and she regularly makes excellent points, may I say. But the point is that this is something that creates enthusiasm for young people. And when you meet the young students at the University of Strathclyde, you can see that this is something that engenders future and excitement. And that is a good thing. I'm obliged, Madam Deputy Speaker.